There is a moment, and every officer in the interstellar concordat has one, if they've served long enough near human space, where you stop filing reports and start keeping a private log. Mine started after Vareth Station. Not because of what the humans did there. Because of what they said afterward. We had intercepted their operational debrief. Clean data, straight off their own relay. Our linguist translated the senior officer's closing remarks to her unit: 43 soldiers, 6 medics, 3 engineers, emerging from 18 days inside a station we had classified as unsalvageable. 43 losses expected. 0 acceptable. They brought out all 43. The senior officer's closing remarks, translated verbatim: good work. Eat something. Sleep. Do it again. That was it. No ceremony. No record of what they'd improvised with failing life support and half a welding torch. No mention of the thing they'd built in Base 7 that our engineers spent 11 weeks trying to reverse engineer before finally writing in the official summary: construction method, unclear. Structural logic, non-standard. Functional result, undeniable. I've been watching humans for 6 years now. I still don't know what they know that we don't. I'm beginning to suspect they don't know either. And, somehow, that is the most unsettling part of all. This is the account of what I witnessed during the Kareth expansion conflict, Year 3. I am attaching it without recommendation. I trust you'll understand why, by the end. Senior Analyst Vethoric, 3rd Intelligence Division, Concordat Fleet. The first thing you notice, running intelligence on a human forward unit, is the noise. Not weapons fire. Not calm chatter. Not the procedural bark of tactical commands that every military species in the Concordat trains into its soldiers from the first day of service. Talking. They talk constantly. To each other, to themselves, to equipment that cannot possibly respond. I have a 17-hour audio log from the Kareth perimeter in which a human soldier named Reyes, Staff Sergeant Elena Reyes, 3rd Forward Unit, designation R7, spent 40 minutes having what I can only describe as a sustained argument with a cargo loader that had stopped responding to input. The cargo loader did not win the argument. By minute 41, it was moving again. I flagged the audio with a note that read: possible mechanical fault resolved through percussive maintenance and verbal coercion. My supervisor, Fleet Commander Asath, looked at the note for a long time before asking me, in the tone she usually reserved for reporting hull breaches, whether I was being serious. I was. I am always serious. It's a personality defect I'd been informed of repeatedly. But, I'm getting ahead of myself. Background: because the Council's briefing request was specific and I intend to be thorough, even if thorough is, as Asath once told me, the most exhausting quality in an analyst. Vethoric, please sit down. I had been assigned to monitor Sector 9 Kareth approximately 4 months into the expansion conflict, which is the Concordat's polite name for what the Kareth sovereignty called a territorial clarification and what the humans called, with characteristic efficiency, the mess. The mess had started over a relay station. It had expanded, as messes tend to, into something involving 3 inhabited systems, a disputed gas corridor, 11 diplomatic channels simultaneously failing, and a human military unit that had been dropped into the middle of it to stabilize the situation. That is a direct quote from the deployment order. I have read it many times. It does not get clearer. The humans had been given Sector 9 Kareth, a stretch of space with 3 contested outposts, 1 operational station, and the remnants of a supply chain that the sovereignty had been systematically degrading for 6 weeks. The assignment: hold the sector, maintain the supply chain, do not escalate. Standard doctrine, for any Concordat species, would have been to establish a defensive perimeter, call for reinforcement, and wait. The humans did not do that. I picked up R7's unit on day 1. They were moving. Not defensively. Toward the problem, which was the sovereignty's forward listening post at Kareth 3, a station the size of a small transport vessel bolted to an asteroid that had no strategic value except that it could see everything in a 200,000 kilometer radius, and the human supply line ran directly through that radius. Standard approach: avoid it, reroute, accept the degraded supply chain. What Reyes did, she took 11 soldiers and a shuttle that I later learned had a cracked heat shield. I only found this out because one of her soldiers mentioned it, offhandedly, in a conversation I was monitoring, and I had to replay the audio 3 times to confirm I'd heard correctly, and she flew directly at the listening post. Not to attack it. To hail it. She hailed the sovereignty post, opened a channel, and told them, in their own language, that she was a maintenance contractor responding to a distress ping. There was no distress ping. I checked. The sovereignty post commander asked for verification codes. Reyes gave him a code that, when I ran it through our database, corresponded to a defunct supply consortium that had dissolved 8 years prior. The post commander accepted it. I sat with that for a while. Asaf, when I reported it, said, she lied to them. Yes. With an 8-year-old fake code. Yes. And, it worked. It worked. Asaf made a sound I had not heard her make before. I documented it in my personal log as, vocalization, category unknown, possible resignation. Inside the post, Reyes and 2 of her soldiers spent 40 minutes. The rest stayed on the shuttle, which remained powered down on the docking clamp, which I thought was a liability if they needed to leave fast. A cold shuttle was a problem until I realized that the Sovereignty's post sensors were actively scanning for engine signatures and a cold shuttle read as cargo. I had not considered that. I should have. I started a new sublog at that point, separate from my official reports. I called it Things I Should Have Considered. It got long. When Reyes came back out, she had 3 Sovereignty communications officers with her. Not as prisoners. They were walking alongside her. One of them was eating something. I had no visual, audio only, but there was a very clear chewing sound, and Reyes was talking. She talked for the entire walk back to the shuttle. I don't have a full transcript. The comm quality degraded near the docking clamp. But I have fragments, and the fragments include the following. Not saying your commander isn't doing what he thinks is right, I'm saying the supply chain degradation hits your outpost too, right? You told me that yourself. The resupply cycle's been pushed twice. Look, I'm not asking you to do anything, I'm asking you to not do something, which is actually much easier. Yeah, I know, but consider that I am offering you a situation where nothing explodes and everyone gets resupplied, versus the situation you currently have, which is the one where eventually something explodes. The 3 Sovereignty communications officers did not defect. But the listening post went dark for 6 hours. Equipment malfunction, their official log stated. The human supply chain ran unimpeded for 6 hours. 6 hours was enough to move everything they needed through. I added 7 new entries to Things I Should Have Considered. Day 4. I want to be precise about Day 4, because Day 4 is when I began to understand that I was watching something I did not have a category for. The Sovereignty had figured out the listening post situation by then. Not the specifics. I don't think they ever established exactly what Reyes had said to those 3 communications officers, but they knew the post had been compromised and they responded by sending a patrol wing to establish a physical presence over the supply corridor. Patrol wing, 6 vessels, midweight, standard armament. Against a human unit operating out of a cracked shuttle and 2 outposts with degraded defensive systems. Standard doctrine, Reyes should have consolidated, called for reinforcement, and ceded the corridor temporarily. What Reyes did was make a list. I know this because one of her soldiers photographed it. I have no idea why. The photo circulated in their internal comm channel and I pulled it. Handwritten. On what appeared to be the back of a ration packet. It said, things we have: 1 shuttle, cracked, fine, 2 outpost defense grids, 1 working-ish, the asteroid field at K7, check, 14 people who are very annoyed. Approximately infinite spite. That was the list. Approximately infinite spite was the last line. I added it to my personal log under a new section I titled, Human Resource Assessment Methodology. What they did with the asteroid field at K7 took me 3 days to fully reconstruct. The short version, they didn't fight the patrol wing. They made the asteroid field fight it for them. The K7 field was a loose cluster, navigable, but requiring active course adjustment, the kind of space that a cautious pilot treats with respect. Reyes sent 2 of her engineers, a woman named Costigan and a man named Park, who, according to side-channel communications I intercepted, were in the middle of an ongoing disagreement about the correct way to seal a coolant fitting and did not stop having this disagreement during the operation to place a series of small charges in the field. Not to blow anything up. To nudge things. Carefully calculated nudges that, over approximately 19 hours, shifted the drift patterns of 11 significant asteroid clusters in K7. The changes were small. A degree here. A fractional velocity adjustment there. Nothing that would register as deliberate on a standard survey sweep. Unless you were looking at where those clusters would be in 72 hours. Which the Sovereignty Patrol Wing was not. Because in 72 hours, the Patrol Wing's standard holding position, the one their doctrine specified for establishing a corridor blockade, would be occupied by approximately 400,000 tons of drifting rock. Not as a trap. Not as a weapon. Just as a problem. A problem that would take them days to navigate around. Days during which the corridor remained open. Days the humans used to resupply, reinforce, and run 3 separate infrastructure repairs on outpost systems that had been degrading for 6 weeks. When the patrol wing finally established their blockade position, delayed, disrupted, forced into a secondary holding pattern, the supply chain was already reconstituted. There was nothing left to block. I filed my Day 7 report with a note at the bottom that I later wished I had phrased differently. The note said, human unit operating in Sector 9 Karath appears to be conducting operations significantly beyond documented capability parameters. Recommend reassessment of threat classification. Asath called me personally. That had never happened before. Vethorik, she said. The council is asking questions. I told her I had more data incoming. She said, the council is asking uncomfortable questions. I understood the distinction. How much of this is their standard doctrine, she asked. I told her I didn't know. I told her I'd been monitoring human military doctrine databases for 2 years and I couldn't find the asteroid nudge in any of it. I couldn't find the fake maintenance contractor play. I couldn't find the apparently infinite spite resource listed in any official capacity assessment. So they're improvising, Asath said. Yes. All of it? All of it that I can verify. She made the sound again. The one I documented as vocalization, category unknown, possible resignation. Then, she said, how many personnel does this unit have? 14, I told her. After Costigan twisted her knee on the asteroid operation and had been sidelined to communications. 14, Asath said. Yes. A pause. 14, she said again. I waited. I'm going to go recalibrate the threat matrix, she said finally. Don't file anything until I tell you. She ended the calm I filed anyway. Day 9. I want to include Day 9 because Day 9 is the day I stopped thinking of Reyes as a unit commander and started thinking of her as something I didn't have a word for. The Sovereignty, by Day 9, had figured out the asteroid operation. Not the full mechanics of it, I'm not sure they ever worked out exactly how it was done, but they understood that the patrol wing displacement had been deliberate. They responded with something more direct, a ground insertion team at Outpost Karath 1. 12 soldiers. Good ones. Sovereignty infantry with full kit and a breach protocol that, on paper, should have taken the outpost in under an hour. They were in the outpost for 9 hours. I don't mean they took 9 hours to take it. I mean they were in it for 9 hours and never took it. The full record of those 9 hours includes, for separate instances of the outpost's internal lighting being used as a disorientation tool, a corridor that the Sovereignty team had cleared twice becoming, on the third pass, mysteriously full of machinery that had not been there before, a communications blackout that lasted 40 minutes and, that the Sovereignty team's own debrief attributed to equipment failure before someone apparently looked more carefully and changed that to deliberate interference, method undetermined, and one incident that I still cannot fully explain, involving the outpost's emergency pressure system, 3 of Reyes's soldiers, and a result that left 4 Sovereignty infantrymen locked in a storage compartment they could have opened from the inside if they had known that the interior panel had been rewired. They did not know the interior panel had been rewired. Reyes had rewired it herself, at some point, at some time I could not identify in the sensor logs, during a 9-hour period when she was simultaneously coordinating a supply transfer, running comms for the asteroid field cleanup operation, and eating what sounded like crackers. I could hear the crackers. They were very loud. At hour 9, the Sovereignty insertion team withdrew. Their debrief, which I obtained 4 days later, stated that the outpost was structurally modified beyond navigable parameters and that continued operation within the structure posed unacceptable risk to unit cohesion. 14 people. 14 people had restructured the tactical logic of a military outpost so thoroughly that 12 professional infantry soldiers could not operate inside it. I added a new entry to things I should have considered. It just said, everything. Late on day 9, after the Sovereignty team had cleared the outpost sensor range, I picked up Reyes on the internal comm. She was talking to her unit. Not a debrief. Not a tactical rundown. Just talking, in the way I had learned was how she processed. She said, "Costigan, how's the knee?" Costigan said something I couldn't make out. Reyes said, "Good." Park, the coolant fitting. Park said, "Sealed." Was it your way or Costigan's way? A pause. Mine, Park said. And, did it work? Another pause. Longer. Yeah. Costigan, for the record. Costigan, from what sounded like a medical bunk, very distinctly said, "You're welcome, Park." There was laughter. 5 or 6 voices. Tired laughter, the kind with no energy left to be anything other than genuine. I sat with the audio for a while. Then, I opened a new file in my personal log. I called it, "The Thing I Don't Have a Category For." It was going to be a long file. I could already tell. I should explain the beverage situation before I explain the council, because they are related. Concordat standard issue field analyst rations include a hot liquid option that is described in the supply manifest as thermal stimulant, category, comfort provision. It is the color of rust. It smells like something that gave up halfway through becoming something else. It has a name in 3 languages and none of them are flattering. I had never understood why senior analysts drank so much of it. I understood now. I was on my 4th cup when Asatha's formal request arrived. Prepare a summary briefing for council review. Topic: Human force multiplication in contested sectors. Duration: comprehensive. Classification: elevated. I read it twice. Then, I looked at my notes. The actual notes, not the official reports, the personal log, the subfiles, things I should have considered, the thing I don't have a category for, the increasingly long document I titled, somewhat desperately, How? How was 47 pages long. None of it had an answer. The council briefing was scheduled for 14 days out. That gave me time, technically. More than enough time, if I was summarizing a normal unit conducting normal operations in a normal tactical situation. I did not have a normal tactical situation. On day 11, Reyes's unit intercepted a Sovereignty resupply convoy. Not with weapons. With a conversation. I have to be precise here because intercepted is the wrong word and I used it in my draft report and Asath made me take it out. What happened was, the convoy's lead pilot received a call from what appeared to be a Sovereignty traffic control relay, rerouting them due to a navigational hazard in Corridor K9. There was no hazard in K9. There was a frequency modulator that Reyes's engineer Park had apparently built out of components from the Crack shuttle's secondary systems and positioned to echo at the correct frequency band to read as a traffic control relay at short range. I know this because I found it afterward. We found it because one of our survey teams almost flew into it. The convoy rerouted through a corridor where, it turned out, the humans had a very small sensor array and approximately 6 hours of uninterrupted scan time before the Sovereignty re-established traffic control contact and the convoy figured out they'd been rerouted by a metal box wedged between 2 rocks. I added to how did they know the convoy frequency? I had no answer. I left it open. I have a personal policy about leaving questions open that I can't answer. I leave them in red text, so I can see how many there are. The document was very red. On day 13, Costigan's knee became strategically significant. I want to be careful how I write this, because I am aware of how it sounds. Costigan, the engineer, the one with the knee injury who'd been on communications since the asteroid operation, had been monitoring sovereignty comms from Outpost Kareth 1. Monitoring was the extent of her assigned role. She was injured. She was on light duty. She was supposed to be managing signal traffic and staying off her leg. What she had apparently also been doing, over the past 6 days, was learning. The Sovereignty used a rotating cipher for their tactical communications. Standard protocol, not unusual, hard to crack under normal conditions. Our own intelligence division had been working a partial break on their cipher rotation for 2 months and had gotten approximately 40% of the way there. Costigan, in 6 days, from a medical bunk, with no cryptographic background that I could find in her service record, got to 73%. I verified this 3 times. I called Asath. Asath said, "Is she a specialist?" No. Her file lists her specialization as structural engineering and systems maintenance. Has she had cryptographic training? Not in any record I can access. Then, how? I don't know, I said. Asath said nothing for a moment. What did she do when she was on light duty? She asked finally. I pulled the comm logs. Costigan had spent 6 days monitoring sovereignty comms, making extensive notes in a personal document I didn't have access to, arguing with Park over the coolant fitting through text-only messages, eating what sounded like the same crackers Reyes had been eating, and I found this in the outpost's passive audio log, humming. She had been humming, semi-continuously, for 6 days. I reported this accurately. I regret reporting it accurately. Asatha's response was a very long silence followed by, Ivethoric, are you telling me that one of their injured personnel, while sidelined, casually broke a cipher that our intelligence division has been working on for 2 months? I told her I was telling her exactly that. Another silence. While humming. Yes. File it, she said. File all of it. The council's already nervous. I filed it. The day after I filed it, Costigan's notes, the personal document I hadn't been able to access, got flagged by our passive monitoring system when she referenced a sovereignty ship ID that we'd been tracking. I got a partial read on the document before the flag closed. It wasn't cryptographic methodology. It was a list of patterns. Not mathematical patterns. Not cipher wheels or frequency analysis the way our specialists would approach it. Just patterns. Things that repeated. Rhythms. She'd written, at the top of one page, it sounds like drumming if you listen long enough. It sounds like drumming. I added that to how and read. The council briefing was at 42 days elapsed. I had originally been given 14 days to prepare. The timeline had been extended twice, once because I kept finding new things and, once because Asath told me, very directly, that the council needed more time to prepare themselves. For a briefing. About 1 unit of 14 humans. I did not comment on this. I had opinions. I kept them in a separate document I titled Opinions I'm Keeping to Myself, which at that point was also 47 pages long. The council chamber is designed to communicate authority. High ceilings. Acoustic materials that make every voice sound slightly more significant than it actually is. Seats arranged so that the 11 council members are always looking down at the briefing floor. I have given 3 briefings there in my career and I have always found the architecture oppressive in a way that is probably intentional. I stood at the briefing floor and I looked up at 11 faces that represented the 7 primary species of the Concordat, and I thought, they asked the question. They need to hear the answer. The question the council had formally submitted, which I had been provided in writing so I could structure my briefing around it, was, how are humans advancing their tactical and technological capabilities at a rate that exceeds documented projection models? That was the question. I had 42 days of data, 93 pages of notes, 17 subfiles, 1 document of opinions I was keeping to myself, and approximately no satisfying answer. I began anyway. Council, I said. I'll start with what we know. Projection models, I explained, are built on observable inputs. Resources, training time, institutional knowledge transfer, research infrastructure, documented failure rates. We project advancement by measuring those inputs and applying historical rates. The model works for every spacefaring civilization we have studied. It does not appear to work for humans. Not because the inputs are wrong. The inputs are correct. Human resources, infrastructure, training pipelines, all of it falls within projected parameters. The problem is the output. Explain the gap, said Councilmember Verathian, who I had always found to be the most direct of the 11 and, therefore, the one I found least exhausting. I put up the first data comparison. Left side, projection model output for a unit of 14 personnel operating in a contested sector with degraded infrastructure and no reinforcement for 42 days. Expected outcomes, defensive holding pattern, gradual attrition, between 3 and 7 personnel losses, supply chain maintained at 60 to 70% functional capacity, 0 tactical innovation beyond standard doctrine. Right side, observed output. Verathian looked at the comparison for a long time. There are no losses, she said. 0, I confirmed. The supply chain is at 92%. 94, actually, as of yesterday's assessment. They'd repaired a relay node that hadn't been functional since before the conflict started. With 14 people. With 14 people, one of whom had been on restricted duty for most of the period in question. 13 people. I did not correct the math. She was making a different point. And, they broke our cipher, she said. 73%, I confirmed. One person. Informally. While recovering from a knee injury. A different council member Sothrail, who represented the Felhari and had the unfortunate habit of making sounds when he was thinking that everyone in the chamber could hear, made a sound. I waited. Our projection models, said another council member, Preeth, whose species communicated through layered vocalizations and who had a translator that always ran about 2 seconds behind so conversations with her required patience. Our projection models, are they wrong, or are the humans an outlier? I had prepared for this question. The honest answer was, I don't know. The politically safe answer was, we need more data. What I said was, I believe the models are measuring the wrong variable. That landed differently than I expected. Silence. Real silence, which in the council chamber with its acoustic architecture sounds like a hell breath. Explain, said Verathian. I had 37 slides prepared. I used 4. The first slide was the conversation Reyes had with the Sovereignty Communications officers, transcribed. The way she'd moved from small complaints about supply degradation, complaints they shared, to a shared acknowledgement of the problem, to a solution that happened to benefit her unit in a single conversation, with no explicit negotiation framework, no formal protocol, no preparation time. The second slide was Costigan's note. The one that said, it sounds like drumming if you listen long enough. I had included it because it was the most accurate summary of human pattern recognition I'd been able to find. They don't build models the way we do. They listen until something starts to have a rhythm, and then, they follow the rhythm, and then, they beat it. The third slide was the resource list. Approximately infinite spite. I had wrestled with whether to include this. It was handwritten on a ration packet. It was not a formal document. It was not intelligence in any category I had a classification for. But, it was the most honest assessment of their operational resource base I'd found in 42 days. The fourth slide was their casualty record. 42 days. Multiple engagements. Active tactical operations across 3 contested sites. 0. I had added, at the bottom, one note that I had not cleared with a SAF. It said, our projection models measure resources and training. They do not measure what happens when a group of beings decides, collectively, individually, repeatedly, that failing is not an option they're willing to accept. We do not have a value for that. We have no unit of measurement for it. We cannot project it. We cannot account for it. I do not know what it is called. I know what it looks like. It looks like 14 people in a cracked shuttle making a list of everything they have, and, adding to the bottom of it, infinite spite. And, then, acting as if that is a real resource. And, being right. Verithian read the slide. She looked at it for a long time. Then, she said, not to me, not to the room, the kind of statement that's really a question said out loud just to hear how it sounds. What do you call an unquantifiable will to continue? Nobody answered. I had an answer. I'd been sitting with it for 11 days. I'd found it in a very old human text that our linguistic database had catalogued and, then, apparently never followed up on. But, I didn't say it in the chamber. I wrote it in opinions I'm keeping to myself. After the briefing, walking back through the Concordat's main transit corridor toward my assigned quarters, I passed through the section where they post new deployment orders. There was a new one up. Sector 9 Kareth, extending operational mandate, 3rd Forward Unit, designation R7. 6 more months. Same 14 people. Same cracked shuttle, though I had to assume they'd fixed the heat shield by now. Same 3 contested outposts. New objectives: stabilize expanded corridor network, support diplomatic re-engagement with Sovereignty Secondary Command, assess long-term infrastructure viability of the sector. I stopped and read it. Then, I looked at the list of assigned personnel. All 14. Costigan's name was there. Her medical clearance had been updated 2 days prior. Full duty. Park's name was there. Reyes's name was at the top. I stood in the corridor for a while. Then, I went back to my quarters and opened my personal log and added one final entry for the day. It said, the council asked how. I gave them 37 slides and used 4. What I didn't say, I'm not sure how matters. I've been asking how for 42 days. I think the more relevant question is what happens in month 3. And month 4. And month 5. What happens when a group of beings who treat approximately infinite spite as a viable resource has 6 more months to get better at being exactly what they already are? I added, I should sleep. I did not sleep. I made more thermal stimulant and opened a new document. I titled it, Month 3. Here is something they do not tell you when you are assigned long-term intelligence monitoring of a foreign unit. After a while, you start to recognize their voices without checking the ID tags. I'm not sure when that happened. Somewhere in the 2nd month of the extended assignment, I stopped noting in my log communications intercept, source, Sergeant Okafor, and started just writing Okafor. Like I knew him. Like he was someone in the next office. He wasn't. He was a man I had never met, would likely never meet, and was professionally obligated to surveil, analyze, and report on. I knew his laugh. His laugh was how I found out about the thing at Kareth 2 before the sensor logs caught it. Day 61 of the extended mandate. Month 3, Week 1. I was doing a routine comb sweep when I heard Okafor laughing. Not the tired laughter from Night 9, this was different. Sharper. The kind with teeth in it. I pulled the audio and worked back. 40 minutes earlier, Reyes had called a unit briefing. I had the audio passive capture from the outpost, standard procedure. The briefing had been about the supply network, which by this point the humans had expanded from 3 nodes to 7, including 2 that, technically, had not existed before Reyes's unit started working in the sector. They had built nodes. Not from materials sent to them. From materials that were there. Pre-conflict industrial remnants, an old sovereignty maintenance cache they'd found at K11 that had been inactive long enough to be legally ambiguous, and one structure that Park had apparently designed from scratch because, according to a call I pulled, the math said it would hold and the math has not been wrong yet so. The math had not been wrong yet. That had become a unit expression. I'd heard it 11 times in 2 weeks, across different personnel, applied to different situations. The math has not been wrong yet. Park would not have recognized it as a philosophy. Reyes probably would have. I wasn't sure it mattered either way. The briefing had covered the new nodes. Then, Reyes had said, and I have this verbatim because I replayed it, new development. We've got company at K16. K16 was a position on the outer edge of the sector. Nothing had been out there, no strategic significance, no infrastructure, no reason for anything to be at K-16. New company, she'd said. Not sovereignty. Third party. Running dark, no transponder, minimal signature. Park spotted the heat differential at 0400. Park had been awake at 0400. I checked the logs. Park was routinely awake at 0400. He didn't sleep well. I knew this. I knew this the way you know things about a colleague, not from a report, just from proximity, from the pattern of when his comm activity picked up and when it dropped off. This was when I noticed I had stopped writing certain things in my official logs. Not because they were classified. Not because they were irrelevant. Because I knew them and they'd become so normal to me that I'd stopped flagging them as data points and started treating them as background. I had developed a blind spot. This is a significant professional problem. I opened a new section in opinions I'm keeping to myself and titled it, My Blind Spots, and I listed everything I knew about our Seven's personnel that I had stopped reporting because it had started to feel like knowing rather than intelligence. The list was long. The third party at K-16 was a Velnathari prospecting vessel. The Velnathari are not a member of the Concordat. They are not aligned with the sovereignty. They are, to the extent that any species is just a thing, primarily interested in finding things of value in places other beings have decided are not worth their time. The Karath sector, in its current condition, 3 years of low-grade conflict, degraded infrastructure, disputed jurisdiction, was exactly the kind of place a Velnathari prospector would go. Because everyone else had decided it wasn't worth their time. The Velnathari captain, according to her transponder once she'd powered it on, which happened after Reyes hailed her, which happened approximately 2 hours after Okafor had his laugh, was named Sareth Voss. I know Sareth Voss's name because by the end of month 3 she had visited Karath sector 4 more times, and by the end of month 4 she had a semi-permanent berth at Outpost Karath 3, and by the end of month 5 she had introduced Reyes's unit to 6 other Velnathari contacts and the supply chain that had started as 7 nodes was at 11. But that's ahead of where I am. On day 61, Reyes hailed a dark-running prospecting vessel at K-16 and said, "You've been sitting on our heat sensors for about 6 hours. If you're prospecting, you're probably interested in what we've found. We're interested in company. You want to talk?" Sareth Voss, according to the audio, took 4 seconds to respond. "What did you find?" she said. "An industrial remnant cache at K11 we haven't fully assessed. Disputed jurisdiction, which means we can't formally claim anything, which means informally it's available to whoever does the work. You're a prospector. You know what that means. Who else knows about it? Nobody who's currently in the sector." Another pause. "I'm transmitting a docking request," Sareth Voss said. Okafor had been laughing because Park had bet him 3 rations that the prospector would respond in under 10 seconds. Reyes had gotten a response in 4. Okafor owed Park 3 rations. Okafor's laugh had teeth in it because he thought this was funnier than the actual contents of the bet. I added it to my log. Both the intelligence value and the laugh. I stopped distinguishing. Here is what happened in month 3 that I could have predicted and didn't. The humans made a friend. Not an ally. Not a formal relationship. Not a diplomatic engagement with documented protocols and mutual defense clauses. A friend. Sareth Voss was back at K-16 within a week of the first meeting. Then, at K-11. Then, she brought a second vessel. Her associate or partner or whatever the Velnathari equivalent was a male named Doreth who communicated almost entirely in grunts and appeared to be extraordinarily competent at assessment surveys. Doreth assessed the K-11 cache in 6 hours. It took our own survey teams 8 days to confirm what he'd written in a 2-page report. In exchange for access to K-11, Sareth Voss started running cargo. Not for the Concordat. Not officially. Through channels that were technically legal if you read the specific clauses of the Velnathari Commercial Code, which nobody in the sovereignty was doing because they'd never anticipated that the humans would develop a relationship with a Velnathari prospector in a disputed sector at the edge of nobody's jurisdiction. The supply chain, which had been at 94% when I briefed the council, was at 106% by day 80. 106% of projected capacity. I had to check the model twice. The model didn't have a number above 100. It had never needed one. I added a new document to my personal log. I titled it, Things the Model Doesn't Have Numbers For. On day 78, Costigan fully broke the sovereignty cipher. 100%. She filed it, not officially, there was no formal intelligence channel between her unit and our division, she just included it in a resupply request manifest, appended at the bottom under a header sheet titled Miscellaneous Findings, Take or Leave It. Take or leave it. I sat with that for a long time. Our intelligence division had been working on that cipher for 4 months. Costigan had completed it in 3 weeks, the last 2 of which she'd been back on full duty running structural assessments on the expanded node network. She'd done it in her spare time. I thought about how to phrase this in my report. I wrote, human personnel demonstrate capacity for parallel cognitive processing across primary assignments and secondary analytical tasks at rates significantly above Concordat baseline. I deleted it. It was accurate and it communicated nothing. I wrote, one of them finished the cipher in her spare time. Take or leave it. I sent that version to Asaf. Asaf's response was 3 words, Vethoric. Official report. I wrote the official version. But, I kept the other one in opinions I'm keeping to myself. Day 89. This is the entry I've rewritten the most. The sovereignty made a significant push on day 89. Not a patrol wing, not an insertion team. Something more deliberate, a coordinated pressure operation across 2 of the sector's 3 contested points simultaneously, the kind of multi-vector operation designed to divide a defending force, force prioritization, create vulnerability through choice. Split attention. Split resources. Make them choose. It was a good operation. I have to say that. It was well-timed, well-coordinated, and, against any other unit of 14 personnel with those resources, it would have worked. Reyes didn't split her unit. She split herself. She ran both responses simultaneously, from 2 separate locations, communicating through Costigan, who was acting as a relay hub with decoded sovereignty comms running in her earpiece and English running out of her mouth. I was monitoring all 3 channels. Costigan was translating sovereignty tactical comms into plain English in real time, filtering out the noise, feeding Reyes the relevant data, and simultaneously managing the communications traffic for 2 active operations. Reyes was at Kareth 1 and, on the comm to Kareth 3 and, making decisions for both locations, and, they were not small decisions. At Kareth 1, she made a call that I still don't fully understand. There was a structural compromise in the outpost's outer perimeter, sovereignty insertion was 40 seconds out, and, the textbook response was to pull back to the inner ring and establish defensive position. Reyes told her people to go through the outer wall. Not through the door in the outer wall. Through the wall. Park had apparently been running structural assessments on the outpost since week 2 of the extended mandate. He knew which sections of the outer wall were not load-bearing. He had told Reyes this at some point. She had filed it somewhere in her head and not told me, obviously, because she had no idea I existed. They went through the wall in a section Park had flagged, came around the outside of the sovereignty insertion team, and established position behind them. The insertion team, expecting resistance in front, found it behind. The operation at Kareth 3 was handled differently, I won't detail all of it, but the short version is that Okafor, who was running the response there, used the sovereignty's own cipher keys to send a false recall order to half their assault element. False recall order. Using a cipher that Costigan had decoded and they'd been quietly sitting on for 11 days, waiting. I had not flagged that they were sitting on it. I had not known they were sitting on it. They'd had 100% cipher access for 11 days and they'd waited until the moment when using it would hurt most. I added to things the model doesn't have numbers for, patience as a weapon. Day 89 ended. No losses. Again. The sovereignty withdrew again. Their debrief, which I had access to now thanks to the cipher, was extraordinary. I read it twice. It described our 7 as operating with apparent full awareness of tactical communications, which was true and also not the most alarming part of their assessment. The most alarming part was a note by their intelligence officer, a line that I think about often, that said, "Unit appears to improve under pressure. Performance metrics increase as operational complexity increases. This is not standard. Recommend re-evaluation of tactical engagement doctrine for human-defended sectors." I underlined that in my copy. Improves under pressure. Not a projection. Not a theory. Their own intelligence officer, watching the same thing I was watching, writing it plainly in an internal document not meant for anyone but their own command chain. They had seen what I'd seen. And they were drawing the same conclusion. On night 89, after the operations had closed and the sector had gone quiet and the sensors had settled into the baseline rhythms that I now knew as well as I knew my own quarters, I heard Reyes on the comm. She was talking to Sareth Voss. Not a tactical debrief. Not a resupply discussion. Just talking. The way she talked. The way I had spent almost 4 months monitoring and cataloging and still couldn't fully categorize. Sareth Voss said something in Velnathari. I don't have full translation capability in that language, it's not in my standard toolkit. I got fragments. Reyes responded in what I believe was an attempted Velnathari, with significant grammatical errors that Sareth Voss apparently found amusing, because there was a sound that I'd started to recognize as Velnathari laughter. They talked for 22 minutes. About nothing strategic. About K11, about the cache assessment, about Dorotha's methodology, about whether one of the node structures was sound or would need reinforcement, about the food situation at Kareth 1 which had apparently improved now that Sareth Voss was running cargo. 22 minutes. At the end of it, Sareth Voss said something short. Again, incomplete translation. But Reyes's response was clear. Yeah, she said. Likewise. I am aware that I have been building towards something in this report. I am aware that the Council's question, how are humans advancing faster than projected, deserves an answer that functions in a briefing context, with slides, with data, with quantifiable values. I have the data. I can produce the slides. I can give the Council numbers. What I cannot give the Council, and what I have spent months trying to find the language for, is this: the Sovereignty's intelligence officer wrote improves under pressure and then stopped. He stopped because that was the intelligence conclusion. That was the data. What he didn't write, what neither of us can quantify, is the texture of day 89. The thing I was actually watching, across 3 simultaneous channels, while Reyes made decisions for 2 locations and Costigan translated in real time and Okafor waited 11 days to use a cipher key at exactly the right moment. They were not managing the situation. They were in it. Fully. Present in a way that I had never observed in any unit I'd monitored before, any Concordat military, any sovereignty force, any species standard response to combat complexity. No distance. No clinical processing. They were in the thing, and being in it was how they moved through it faster than the thing could move against them. I don't have a projection model value for that. I don't know that I ever will. I know that when the sector finally went quiet on day 89, after the sovereignty withdrew and the sensor traffic dropped to baseline, the first thing Reyes did was not debrief. Not secure the positions. Not run a status check. She asked if everyone was okay. Not operationally okay. Okay. And they told her. And then she ran the debrief. And then she checked the positions. In that order. Every time. I'd watched long enough to know it was every time. I did not know what to do with that. I still don't. My formal recommendation to the Council is attached separately. It covers tactical reassessment, projection model revision, and suggested Concordat doctrine updates for sectors with active human forces. This document is not that recommendation. This document is the other thing. The thing I've been writing for 4 months in the margins of the official record. I filed it under Analyst's personal observation log, non-classified, non-submitted. Then, I looked at that classification for a long time. Then, I changed it. I sent it to Asath with a note that said, "I think this matters more than the slides." She read it. She sent back 3 words, "Submit it formally." So I did. One more thing. On day 91, 2 days after the push, 2 days before the end of my primary monitoring window, I pulled a passive capture from Outpost Kareth 1. Reyes was in the engineering bay, working on something. The audio was ambient, I couldn't see the visual, no camera coverage in that bay. Park was there too. They were talking about the coolant fitting. Not because it was broken. I think it had been fixed since the first week. But, they were talking about it the way people talk about old arguments, not to rehash them, just to revisit. To acknowledge that the argument had happened and that some version of it had been right. Costigan, apparently, was in the bay too. "I'll admit," Park said, "your way is faster." A pause. "But, mine's cleaner," he said. Costigan said, "They're the same way." Reyes said, "They're absolutely not the same way, I've seen both." A moment. Then, Park said, in the tone of a man who has been having a version of this argument for months and is beginning to find it genuinely enjoyable, "How are they the same way?" And, Costigan said, "They both hold." They both hold. I didn't add that to things I should have considered. I didn't add it to things the model doesn't have numbers for. I didn't add it to how. I wrote it in a new document. One that I hadn't opened before, in 4 months of monitoring, 91 days of logs, 47 pages of analysis. The document had no title. I wrote it there because I didn't know what category it belonged in. They both hold. I submitted this report on day 92, the last day of my monitoring window before reassignment. On day 93, R7 was formally granted extended operational mandate in Sector 9 Kareth. Indefinite duration. I wasn't surprised. I was something else. I'm not sure what. I've left it in the document without a title. I think it can stay there. Senior Analyst Vethoric, 3rd Intelligence Division, Concordat Fleet Personal Observation Log, Non-Classified Sector 9 Kareth, Extended Mandate Period submitted formally, by request of Fleet Commander Asath, for Council record. I trust you'll understand why, by the end.